Lovely. Thank you very much, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:30, so we'll start our virtual meeting of Wiltshire Schools Forum. I'm Lisa Percy and I'm Chair of Wiltshire Schools Forum. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the meeting this afternoon. I can confirm that this meeting is being streamed live to our website, where members of the public will be able to view the meeting online or watch at a later date. Should we have any technical difficulties during the course of the meeting, we will try to rectify them as best as we can. However, please be aware that if this is not possible, we may have to take the decision to reconvene the meeting at a later date. I'm now going to run through and confirm attendance with all forum members and officers who will be presenting, so it's clear for those watching this live stream. I'll read out the names and then ask you to confirm that you are present and who you are representing. Please remember to unmute your microphone to speak and then mute yourself again. So this afternoon we have Aileen Bates.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Chair of Governors at Silverwood School and the Wiltshire Governance Network Special Schools Representative.
Afternoon, Aileen. Lissy Bolton.
Hello, my name's Lissy Bolton. I'm Deputy CEO of Equimead Learning Trust and I'm an early years representative on this forum.
Hi, Lissy. Helen Carpenter.
Hello everyone, I'm Helen Carpenter. I'm Chair of WASH and Secondary Academy Representative and Head Teacher of Kingdown School.
Hi Helen. Stella Fowler.
Good afternoon everybody, Stella Fowler. I am a Primary School Governor Representative and Chair of the Wiltshire Governance Network.
Hi Stella. Either Joe Grenfell or Nikki Barnett, observing from Wiltshire College. Don't know if you can see either of them online, Lisa. They may join us later. Okay. John Hawkins.
Hello, John Hawkins, Teaching Association representative.
Hi, John. Don't know if Councillor Hanning is online, observing from the local youth network.
He gave apologies for today's meeting. Okay,
thank you very much. Does that mean you're standing in on his behalf, Sam?
No.
Okay, just in case. Brett Genie.
Hi, Brett Genie, Secondary Academy Representative from WASH and Head Teacher of Malmesbury School.
Hi, Brett. We have apologies from Georgina Keeley-Theobald. Emily Mullard.
Can't see her on the list.
Okay, Emily may join shortly. We have apologies from Nick Norgrove. As I've said already, I'm Lisa Percy and I'm a Secondary Academy Representative as well as chairing Schools Forum. Ed Powell.
Hi, Ed Powell, Head Teacher of Staverton and representing PHF.
Hi, Ed. Giles Pugh.
Hi, I'm Giles Pugh, representing Salisbury Dyson Board of Education.
Afternoon, Giles. John Reid.
Hi, John Reid, representing Primary Heads Forum.
Afternoon, John. Graham Shaw.
Graham Shaw, representing PHF Academies.
Hi, Graham. Adam Smith. I can't see Adam anywhere. Lisa, can you?
I saw that he had tendered his resignation shortly before the meeting, Lisa. That's coming.
Yeah, he did, but I was expecting him to attend this afternoon anyway. But yeah, okay. Thank you very much. He may join us. Trudy Strawley. No Trudy either. Karen Venner.
I'm Karen Venner. I'm Chair of the Early Years Reference Group and I'm here as an Early Years representative.
Afternoon, Karen. David Hewell.
Hello, David Hewell, Secondary School Governor Representative, representing Wiltshire Governance Network.
Hi, David. And we've had apologies this afternoon from Nicola Whitcomb. We also have some observers this afternoon, or we would have had observers this afternoon, but they may be observing future meetings. So we've got Victoria O'Brien, who's the head at Kington St Michael, who will be sitting in to observe, but has sent her apologies for this afternoon's meeting. and Carol Dean. I don't know if you're all there. Carol is observing this afternoon, as she may well be taking over as the Maintain secondary rep when Nick steps down, that I'll come back to later. Are you there, Carol?
I am. Hello.
Hi. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, will do. So I'm the head teacher of the Stonehenge School and looking to take over in terms of Maintain secondary representative.
Brilliant. Welcome this afternoon. Hope you enjoy our meeting. Okay, moving on to officers then. We have a list of a number of officers with us this afternoon. I'm going to start with you, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Pullin. I'm a Democratic Services Officer and I'm Clerk to Schools Forum.
Thank you. Marie Taylor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Marie Taylor, Head of Finance for Children and Education at the Council.
Hi, Marie. Grant Davis.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Grant Davis, work for Wiltshire Council, looking after all your school funding.
And a good job you do at that as well, Grant. Let's add that onto the conversation. Lovely to see you. Liz Williams.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Williams. I'm the Head of Finance for Care and Wellbeing and the Finance Lead for the High Needs Sustainability Plan.
Hi, Liz. Catherine Davis.
Afternoon, everybody. Catherine Davis. I'm the Director of Education and Skills for Wiltshire Council.
Hi, Catherine. Darryl Freeman.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Darryl Freeman. I'm the Corporate Director for Children and Education and the Statutory Director of Children's Services.
Afternoon, Darryl. Lisa Fryer. Don't know if I can see Lisa's name there at all. She may join us at some point. Ben Stevens.
Hi everyone, I am Ben Stevens. I'm the Inclusion SEND and AP Transformation Lead for Wiltshire Council.
Hi Ben. Louise Lewis, we've had apologies from. Ellen Gay.
Hello everyone, Ellen Jay. I'm also a Democratic Services Officer and I'm just doing the tech for today.
On your own in the council chamber. Doing a great job, Ellen, doing a great job. Simon Thomas.
Afternoon, everybody. Simon Thomas and I lead on our Families and Children's Transformation Programme and Partnership.
Hi, Simon. I don't know if Paul's with us as well this afternoon, Holsworth. No, but I can see that we also have John Spring with us. So welcome, John.
Afternoon, thanks, Lisa. John Spring, Head of Targeted Education, Wiltshire Council.
I don't know if I've missed any other officers because I'm keeping my eye down the list of photographs and the many names that are there, but maybe you will make yourself known shortly. But in the meantime, I will welcome our councillors that have joined us this afternoon. So a very warm welcome. I will formally welcome him shortly, but Councillor John Hubbard, who is our Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills. So welcome to our meeting, John.
Oh, well, there I am. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to join you this afternoon and to learn so much more about what our schools are about.
I'm sure you'll find out quite a bit this afternoon. You might have brain overload by the end of it because there's a lot of things on the agenda. And I noticed we've got Sam Pearce-Kearney with us this afternoon as an observer. Is that right, Sam?
Hi, Sam Pearce-Kearney, Wiltshire Councillor for Carn South and portfolio holder for Safeguarding and Young People. Nice to be here again.
Nice to see you. And then we have a number of other portfolio holders who may join us at future meetings, but I understand are not with us this afternoon. Is there anybody that I've missed at all from that welcome? It's quite a long list this afternoon, which is wonderful.
Hi, my name's Councillor Charlie Stokes. I am actually one of the portfolio holders for SEN, and I'm also Wiltshire Councillor for Melksham East, so I just want to say hello, I am here.
Hello, Councillor Stokes, a very warm welcome and apologies for not reaching you out. I wasn't aware that you would be joining us, but you are very welcome. Anybody else that I have forgot? Oh, Councillor Parman is also with us, apparently, who is our portfolio holder for schools. Is that right, Councillor Parman?
That is right, Chair, but obviously he's feeling a little shy this afternoon, but he might join in a little bit later.
It's lovely to see you. A very warm welcome. Thank you very much. So that's everybody sort of signed in for this afternoon. Moving on to item 1 on our agenda, that's apologies, substitutions and changes of membership. Lisa's already informed us that we've got some apologies this afternoon, but for clarity, we've got, in terms of members, apologies from George Keeley-Theobald, Nick Norgrove, Nicola Whitcomb, Louise Lewis, Victoria O'Brien, and I think that may be it, but there may be more that I've missed. Lisa, have I missed somebody?
I'll check after and I'll add them in if they've not appeared, but I haven't actually had any further apologies, no.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. We don't have any substitutions this afternoon as far as I'm aware. And in terms of changes to membership, we've got welcome to obviously our new cabinet members and portfolio holders who are with us this afternoon. A very warm welcome to you, and we do look forward to working with you moving forwards. And there was a welcome for Emily Mallard, who was joining us this afternoon for a meeting, but is then, I think, from what I understand, stepping down. So it may be that Emily's not been able to join us this afternoon, but we may come back to that one a little bit later. We've also got some goodbyes this afternoon. So Tony Hazen has left us as she's changed job roles, and we're waiting for a replacement for Tony. As we've already mentioned, Nick Norgrove will be leaving because Abbeyfield is becoming an academy. So Carol Dean will be replacing Nick as our Maintain Schools representative. Adam Smith, who Lizzie mentioned earlier, is taking on a new role and sent his resignation earlier on today. And John Reid, who is stepping down from Schools Forum in the new year to focus on his school, which is really important and what we should all be doing alongside what we do with Schools Forum. I'll come back and say some thank yous in a little while, but that does mean we've got a number of vacancies. So just to clarify, our current vacancies from September 2025, we have 2 vacancies for Maintain Primary. We have 1 for Maintain Secondary, although that's going to be filled by Carol. We have 2 for primary academies, 1 from now and then 1 from September. And we have a primary governor representative vacancy as well from now. So we've got quite a lot of things that need filling. I just think it's worth mentioning for those that chair PHF, WASH, who were on the call, to be aware of that, and also Governors Stella, so that we can make sure we get that representation, because the forum works best when we've got right representation from the right people, and we can then move decisions and discussions forward with the right people at the table, really. So that was just to clarify those gaps that we've currently got. Okay, moving on to item 2 on the agenda this afternoon. This is minutes of the previous meeting. Schools Forum are asked to confirm as a true and correct record the minutes of the previous meeting that was held on the 23rd of January, feels like a long while ago now, 2025. And these are found on pages 7 to 22 of your agenda pack. Does anybody have any comments or questions on those minutes, please? I see no hands. I see nobody waving at me or turning on their microphones. So if we don't have any comments or questions on those minutes, I'll take the assent of the meeting to agree those. I move that they're approved. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Giles. And at that point, if I can just remind you to keep alert, I will be asking for seconders for all of the actions from this afternoon's meeting. So it's worth keeping alert to make sure that we can make sure we get that seconder for the approval. If everybody's happy, then I'll make arrangements with the clerk to sign those minutes of the last meeting when we next meet in person. Okay, moving on to item 3 this afternoon, Chairman's announcements. The first thing I'd like to do is to thank everybody who is leaving us, or everybody who's been involved in the work of Schools Forum over the last year, and particularly the councillors who've worked with us during the previous council term. I think it's really important to recognise their contributions. There will be changes to membership over the next coming year, or for the next academic year, and we look forward to welcoming those new members who join us. It is good to have that fluidity on Schools Forum, but also to have the expertise and knowledge of those people that have been on it for a while to keep things moving. So thank you everybody who's contributed. It does make a big difference, and I think it's good that we are an active, vibrant and contributory group. I think it makes a big difference rather than just nodding things through. So thank you all very much for that. At this point, Grant, I think, is going to give us a brief update on the implications from the spending review that happened yesterday. This is obviously a bit of a late breaker, but we felt that it was important that we had a bit of an update and everybody had those headlines. So Grant, I think you've got some slides to briefly present to us about that, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah, unless you were asleep yesterday, you'll be very much aware that there's been a statement from the Chancellor yesterday, which set out some of the sort of funding intentions from the new government, if I could still call them new government, I suppose, from the government around various areas that they're planning to spend the money going forward. So from the spending review that happened yesterday, the Society of County Treasurers issued some sort of documents regarding some of the headlines that were in there. And we just thought it would be useful to share some of those headlines with colleagues today, particularly if you missed any of the ones around education, because there's an awful lot covered off yesterday. So the SEND reform, so this is around SEN, so the reforms are going to be set out in a white paper. That white paper is due to be issued this autumn. That's very exciting for us because obviously SEN is such a huge issue, not just in Wiltshire, but nationally as well. And also coming with that was some additional funding, the transformation fund in there. So £547 million, and then the following year, another £230 million in there. And that's all designed around helping how we deliver SEN education for pupils and things. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes through with there. No immediate action regarding SEN deficits. You'll all be very aware that the local authority has a huge SEN deficit, and Liz will no doubt be talking us through that later on, where we currently stand with that. Now, at the moment, the local authority is kind of cash flowing that deficit, and what we're hoping for was some details around what's going to happen for a national projection and the position on that one. Nothing really coming forward on that, but again, the white paper is out in the autumn, so hopefully there'll be some news coming through in there. And also the government are going to set out further details on supporting local authorities regarding the fair funding review as well. And again, that's one we're really excited about, because fair funding review potentially means fairer funding for schools, and particularly in Wiltshire, where we're one of the lowest funded authorities in the country. When I say one of the lowest funded, out of 150, we're at certainly bottom 20 and have been consistently for forever. Okay, right. Okay, what other news was coming through? Well, 555 million funding to reform in there for the children's social care over the period of this spending review period. So that's another 79 million, 271, and then 270 in each year as we move forward through the 3 years. And then 560 million to help refurbish and expand children's homes and foster care placements and so on, so some more capital type money in there. So there's some nice headlines in there for us to hear about, but what we were really hoping for was more real clarity around funding coming in, particularly for schools and SEN. So those are the headlines that came through. If we could go to the next slide. Honestly, there's only 3 slides to go through, so really coming down to education, this is one of the headline ones that came through. Free school meals being extended. So you'll be aware that children are entitled to free school meals in our schools. And what the government have proposed is we move away from the current system of recording how children are eligible for free school meal to use universal credit going forward. And they've said that that's going to potentially bring in an awful lot more pupils and make them eligible for a free school meal, which is great news. So Treasury have estimated another £410 million to cover that cost. Just as a slight aside on there, free school meals is also the indicator we use for pupil premium in our schools. They are not planning to change the current methodology for how they calculate pupil premium. So free school meals, they're going to use universal credit, and they're carrying on using the current methodology for pupil premium. And then moving away from the free school meals element of funding, what they've said is the school's core budget, the overall budget for funding schools, is going to grow by an average of 0.9% in real terms each year. Now, we'll all have to sort of wait and see how that comes through, what that means for the actual cash coming into Wiltshire in due course. Nice to see it's a positive figure. Obviously, being optimistic, I'd love to have seen that being a lot higher than that, as I'm sure all of you would. But that's the statement that's come out in there. So what they're all saying in there is that the core schools budget is going to increase by £2 billion in real terms, a £4.7 billion cash increase per year going forwards compared to what we've got at the moment. So it's really interesting when we see that come through for Wiltshire and what that means and how they're going to push that funding down through the DSG. So we'll keep you updated when we hear how that's going to come through in due course. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, and there's quite a bit here on schools capital as well, which the Chancellor was very keen to say that, you know, she recognises that a lot of school buildings are crumbling and have got issues around the maintenance or backlog maintenance and things. So they were going to put some additional funding to help school rebuilding and also maintenance in our schools. So an extra 2.4 billion going into the school rebuilding programme, which is positive news, and also for the maintenance to rising to around 2.3 billion in 29-30. So improving the overall condition of all of our school estate, which is really positive news. You'll know as you drive around the county and you see various schools, some are in really great condition, some lovely brand new schools, and we've also got some schools that are obviously a lot older and needing more maintenance as we go forward. So that's really, really positive in there. And also making it available at 2.6 billion from 26 to 27 through the spending review period to fund the provision of mainstream school places. So additional school places to meet demographic need and things there. So those were the headlines that kind of came through. The Society of County Treasurers pulled those slides together, so I can't take credit for them, but it's just a whistle-stop tour through the main points of the Chancellor's statement yesterday. Thank you.
That's great, Grant. Thank you very much for that summary and that overview. I think interesting that some of that funding had actually been announced previously to yesterday, so it wasn't necessarily new announcements. It was money that had all been wrapped up in a different way, I think. And I'm also interested by the provision of mainstream extra places to meet future demographic needs when we're in a situation at the moment when the demographics are actually going in the other direction. But we'll see how that plays out over the next little while, I guess. Thank you very much for that, Grant. A useful summary, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that over the coming Schools Forum meetings. The only other announcement from me this afternoon is that we may consider a comfort break at 3 o'clock if we need it, so that we're not sat at our screens for too long without stretching our legs, but it depends how the agenda goes. So I'll make a call around 3 o'clock, depending on how much is left on the agenda, as to whether we have that comfort break or not. Has anybody else got any other announcements this afternoon, please, that they would like considered as part of this agenda item? Okay, I see no hands, so I will move on to item 4 on our agenda this afternoon. This is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest to note, please? I see no hands up. I see nothing in the chat. I see nobody unmuting their microphones. This is that moment when I begin to wonder if there's actually anybody out there, because I've had no response apart from Grant. Thank you. But OK, so I don't think there are any declarations of interest to note, Lisa. So we will move on to item 5 on our agenda. This is where we note any questions or statements that have come in advance by members of the public. And we've received a question from Jai Taylor, who's the head teacher at Trafalgar School at Downton, which can be found on page 3 of the agenda supplement. And I understand this is related to whether Wiltshire has a mechanism for allocating exceptional or targeted funding for schools with exceptional numbers of EHCPs. And I believe that Liz is going to give us a verbal response to this question, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the very short answer is that Wiltshire doesn't at the moment have a formula for exceptional notional SEN or meeting exceptional numbers of EHCPs in mainstream schools. It's something that we're allowed to have under the high needs regulations, so it would be a call on the high needs block if we were going to implement something. I think on the back of this question, it is something that we've been thinking about as to whether we need to actually look at it. So my suggestion would be that we do take this away and maybe come back at the autumn meeting in October with some sort of further analysis of what that could look like if Wiltshire was to have such a formula. We know that the SEN 2 data will be published at the end of June, so that would enable us to use the most up-to-date sort of published information on numbers of EHCPs, which would probably be a basis for any analysis. So my suggestion would be that we come back to the October meeting having looked at this a bit further with any proposals if that's what we think we need to do. And so Schools Forum could have a look at it.
Thanks, Liz. I think that's a really good idea, and at least we've got up-to-date information then that we can use to make that judgment and to perhaps model what that might look like, because although we need to be mindful of calls on the high needs block, it may be felt that that's an appropriate thing to implement. So yes, please, thank you. And thank you to Lisa for noting that we'll bring it back to the term one, term one, the October meeting of Schools Forum for next year. Thank you. Lisa, can you confirm if we've had any further questions or statements from the public, please?
No, nothing received.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so moving on to item 6 on our agenda this afternoon. This is updates from the working groups, and Schools Forum is asked to note the minutes and updates as per pages 23 to 26 of the main agenda pack and pages 5 to 7 of the agenda supplement, which are the meetings of the joint meeting of the school funding and SEN working groups held on the 22nd of May and the early years reference group meeting held on the 20th of March 2025. Does anybody have any questions or comments on these minutes, please? Okay, I see no hands. I see no microphones off mute. I see nobody waving at me. I'm presuming you're all still there. So could I have I propose that we agree to note those minutes of those meetings. Could I have a seconder? This will be evidence that you're out there. Can I have a seconder for those, please?
I can second that.
Okay, Graham, if you can second one, and Ed, you can second the other, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to take the assent of the meeting to agree these notes unless I hear otherwise. That's great. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 7 of our agenda this afternoon. This is the dedicated schools budget and the budget monitoring for 2024-25. The purpose of this report, which can be found on pages 27 to 36 of the main agenda pack, is to present our budget monitoring information against the dedicated schools grant for the financial year 2024-25. And I'm going to hand over to Marie for this item, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm definitely out here, definitely. So this is the budget monitoring report, the very last one for 24-25. And although it says provisional because Cabinet haven't seen this report yet, but it very much is our final position. Please do feel free to ask any questions, but I'm going to keep this report quite brief, partly because it's about the last financial year, and we're probably now all more interested in the current financial year. But also there was quite a great deal of useful discussion at the working group, which is documented in the minutes. If I go through the main variances at the bottom of the first page of the report, you'll see there was a significant on the screen. There was a significant underspend in the early years block. Now, of this £5 million, £2.8 million related to a very late additional payment of early years block that the DFE sent through in the last quarter. We weren't anticipating it, and they don't normally increase funds at this stage in the year. And I would imagine that it's the extended entitlements, and they must have had reports from other local authorities that cash flow was tight. That's the only thing that I can think of there. It's quite likely. So for those of you who are newer to Schools Forum, all of the blocks, we retain the amount that's given to us in the financial year, with the exception of early years block, where the DFE look at the census data from the early years children in the summer term, and then they do a post adjustment, normally in July, just to compare, and they will be taking some of that underspend away. And what will happen to that is that will come out of our DSG reserve. So it won't affect the 25-26 budget monitoring, but it will sort of take back what they think we don't need. So we're used to that, even though it's a bit irritating when we've got a nice underspend to help us out on our way for 24-25. The overspend on schools block, this has been largely payments to support schools, particularly in the south of the county, with high numbers of children and young people on a resettlement programme that didn't have grant funding. That's unusual for the resettlement programme, but this is the temporary one, and it didn't attract any grant funding. So it felt it was only fair under our current policy to put extra money into schools where they had large numbers. High needs block, our most problematic area. So this £14.5 million pressure is on top of the previously planned transfer to the DSG reserve. So that 28.2 amount on the bottom of the screen there. And we know that this is activity driven, and it's all about the number of EHCPs that we've got. The table on the next page shows that the children with EHCP in Wiltshire, there was a 14% increase since the last financial year. So that's a new 935 children with plans. And we know that Lisa Fryer's teams have been working jolly hard to increase the timeliness of assessments, which is super important for children and their families. But the inevitable knock-on of this is the cost. Looking at the table, I'll get the right page so I can, the table on the next page, we'll be able to see that what we've got something at the top of the bottom block up. This is the paragraph 15 called transition support funding, and this is something that we give schools when they're waiting for a plan and perhaps the plan is overdue. And you will see that we budgeted for 313 children to be supported in this way, but in the event, the actual volume of children being supported in this way has reduced by 70 from our budget to 242. So this is showing that Lisa's team are making real inroads into getting that waiting list sorted out. There's a very small underspend on the central block. The central block is largely there to look after some of our statutory responsibilities as a local authority. The underspend is largely around some vacancies across various teams and also some admissions appeals income. So where does this leave us? It leaves us in the same place as many other local authorities up and down the country. We're legally secure with a deficit reserve, so ordinarily the local authority would not be able to have a deficit reserve. All of our reserves should be positive numbers. But thanks to the statutory override, which we know is officially coming to an end at the end of this new financial year, so at the end of 25-26, we're still legal. More news has now promised in the autumn. We were hoping there'd be something in the announcement yesterday. It feels like it would be impossible for that statutory override not to be extended again. If we have a look at the DSG reserve as it stands now, you can see that brought forward from the previous financial year, so 23-24, with 28.7 million. That early years adjustment that I mentioned earlier, so we had a reduction of £1 million based on our underspend from 23-24 in the reserve. The 28.2 million relates to that planned drawdown from reserve. So that's the amount that we thought we would spend above and beyond what our DSG allocation was for 24-25. In the event, the actual variance was 9.8 million on more than we planned. It's probably quite important to say that the year-end variance is slightly improved, partly because of the early years position, but partly because we had some soft forecasts in relating to children who we thought would be placed before the end of the financial year, and those haven't come to fruition, or they've been cheaper than we've thought. We've perhaps got some mainstream support for those children. The other thing that's come in year is the in-year safety valve payment, and that leads us to a carry forward balance that will bring into the following financial year of £61 million. And as Grant said earlier, that is being cash flowed by the local authority, and that is having quite a significant impact now. The fact that we're having to borrow rather than being able to invest our monies has a monetary impact on our general fund position as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that overview, Marie. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Marie, please? Looks like you might get away with that with no questions or comments, Marie. Then I propose that Schools Forum note the final outturn budget monitoring position, including the balance on the DSG reserve at the end of March 2025, together with the report later in the agenda on the SEND transformation programme. Do I have a seconder for that, please?
Yeah, I'd like to do that, Lisa. Brett.
Thank you, Brett, very much indeed. I'll take the assent of the meeting to agree unless I hear otherwise. That's great, thank you very much. So moving on to item 8 of our agenda this afternoon. That's a SEND transformation update. The purpose of this report, which can be found on pages 37 to 52 of the agenda pack, is to update Schools Forum on the SEND transformation programme and to share the first quarterly monitoring report for 2025-26. I'm going to hand over to Liz for this item, please.
actually Ben that's going to talk to this one. We ended
thought
up
it
doing a
might
bit
be
of
Liz.
a double act on this, but yeah, it's Ben who's going to lead.
Over to you then, Ben. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Chair. So as you say, this report includes the first quarterly monitoring report for 25-26 from the DFE that we sent to the DFE in April, so almost 2 months ago now.
Ben, sorry, can I interrupt you? I don't know if anybody else is having difficulties, but we're having difficulties hearing you properly.
I worried that's why you were frowning. Let me have a look and see if I can improve that.
Can't actually hear you at all now. It's just a very, very muffled sound.
Is that any better?
A little.
I'll give it a go then, and if it doesn't work, Liz, you might have to step in. Yeah, so this report shares the first quarterly monitoring report that we sent to the DFE in April. I'm hoping that Schools Forum will note the rather more positive tone that is contained within this report than the previous monitoring reports, and that is a reflection of the fact that we are starting to see some evidence that the plan is beginning to work. We're continuing to see rates around EHCNA requests, the needs assessment requests, holding broadly steady, and anecdotal reports from other local authorities are that that's not the case everywhere, and so that encourages us that some of that early help and early support work that we're putting in place is having an impact. We're also seeing some really encouraging signs around some of the ceasing work that's going on. The continued decline in the number of EHCPs that are ending with that child becoming NEET. That's a really positive, good news story for our whole system in terms of outcomes for children and young people who have SEND. Obviously, as has already been flagged, that's not without its challenges. We are still, as Marie was saying earlier, 932 EHCPs this year ahead of where we were last year. There's clearly more work to be done in terms of stabilising our system, because we'll never get to a financially sustainable system if we're growing EHCPs at that rate. So there's clearly still more work to be done. There's clearly still more support that we're looking to put in place, and we've just been going through a process of thinking about what projects we want to prioritise going forward. We've been looking at the data in our system and having conversations with stakeholders about how we take that forward, and there's lots of good stuff in there about improved support around transition points from early years into reception and from primary into secondary. There's a big piece of work happening around post-16 transitions. There's some things happening around SEMH need in early years and how we can support children in early years who have SEMH needs going forward then up into their primary school. There's some even more work happening around sort of understanding and supporting children who have that emotionally based school avoidance EBSA, and how we can be working there. So we're really trying to respond to the needs that we can see in the data, but also the needs that we hear from school leaders as well in terms of how we can be providing that support. The significant update, I suppose, is contained in paragraph 6 of the report, which is that the Council has now received a response to our request for an extension to the safety valve agreement. Schools Forum might remember that in December we asked for an extension from 5 years to 7 years for our plan, and we finally heard back earlier, or at the end of last month, that while the government wouldn't be extending any safety valve agreements, they were comfortable that we extended our plan, which obviously feels slightly contradictory, but we have had conversations subsequent to that with the DFE and with our advisors from the DFE, and they've sort of helped us get our head around how we can have a plan and an agreement that aren't quite so aligned. But that's really positive, and I think that starts to reflect a change in the way that the DFE are measuring and monitoring safety valve agreements. They are very much more focused on outcomes now and direction of travel rather than hard and fast deficit targets. And I think that's something that we can be really encouraged by in Wiltshire. I mean, children and young people have been at the centre of our Safety Valve plan anyway, and making sure that we're providing the best support. But the fact that the DfE are now recording that and measuring that is really encouraging, because it means that we can all be nice and aligned. And the final thing I'll mention before I take any questions is, again, the point that was flagged earlier about the reforms. You will notice that I think it's paragraph 7 of the report that says that the white paper we published in summer, obviously that's no longer the case, that will be autumn. And earlier drafts of this paper probably said spring, because I think we've been expecting this white paper for a little while now. And clearly it's quite disappointing that that's been pushed back. But all the mood music from the DfE is about focusing on children and young people, focusing on supporting mainstream inclusion. All of the mood music is about those things, and those things are the things that we're focused on already with our transformation programme. And so I think we'll be in a pretty good place once those reforms are published to be able to understand them and ensure that we're implementing them in a way that is appropriate for Wiltshire schools. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Ben, very much indeed. Does anybody have any questions or observations on this report for Ben, please?
Yes,
Sorry,
Lisa. Yeah.
I can't see who that is. Is that you, John?
It is me indeed. Yep. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it looks. It's reassuring, isn't it, to see that it seems to be going in the right direction. I'm just wondering, Ben, having fewer children, getting the support in place to meet needs prior to the need for EHC is that's great. It's really encouraging. I'm just wondering, on the flip side of that, what do we anticipate in terms of how are you measuring the outcomes? So if we're looking at children now, we're reducing the number, we're putting the things in place to meet their need. That's really good and reassuring. It all comes back to educational outcomes in the end. How exactly are you going to measure that next year after, as these children, that don't receive EHCs, we're making sure that they are actually having their needs met? Should there not be some measure of the outcomes for children with SEN or EHCs or my support plans prior to the EHCs to make sure that
I think that's
not having a negative impact on their educational outcomes?
I think that's a really helpful challenge, and thanks, John, for raising it. And obviously, we keep a general overview of progress and attendance and attainment on pupils in Wiltshire, and we can look at that at school level, and we can be seeing that. I think there's a little bit of a challenge because of some of the discrepancies in the way that SEN support is recorded or identified in different schools across Wiltshire. That's still not a kind of uniform picture yet, and so measuring that in a really robust way is a bit more challenging than something like an EHCP where there should be a more objective standard that marks that level of need. So I think there's still some work to do there about how we measure that. But yeah, as I say, keeping an eye on that attendance level and sort of the progress and attainment levels as well will be really key to seeing this.
I appreciate that it's crystal ball stuff, really, because you can't necessarily tell by not giving the EHC, whether or not their outcomes are down. But I'm just wondering about if there's something worth looking at patterns over time. But yeah, just a question.
No, thanks, John. I think I'll definitely want to look into that.
Lissy, you've got your hand up.
Hi, I just had a couple of questions. One was around representation of resource base colleagues on the System of Excellence steering group, because I couldn't see that in the list of membership there, and I'm mindful that's a key feature in terms of the Wiltshire SEND community. Have we got that representation on the System of Excellence steering groups? That was a question. And the other one was around the placing and emphasis given to PINs, the partnerships in inclusion and neurodiversity. I might be saying the acronym in the wrong order, but something like that. and how that's rolled out in Wiltshire, because I know that has run in 24-25, but when you are looking for the impact and the rollout of that, it feels much more light touch in terms of what can be accessed, what can be seen. It's not visible anywhere in the Wiltshire landscape compared to the work that's done in other local authorities. And a lot of those children are children who end up challenged and therefore challenging in our system. So can we do more with that?
Thanks. I'm going to defer the question around system of excellence to Catherine in a second. On PINS, I think you're right that there are still opportunities to make sure that learning is really embedded and really becomes something that's practical. I think that's probably what we hope will start to happen in the second wave of PINS, so that we can bring that forward. I think there's, it feels like there's such an opportunity there to bring the council and the Parent Care Council and schools and the NHS all together and really come up with something solid and concrete and tangible. That it'll be a shame if that opportunity was missed.
I've trawled some of the other local authorities that have been running PINS last year, and where those resources are really well represented on websites, and we haven't got in the same place yet. So I'm really happy to share with you the links that I've found of where that's looking really helpful for schools and practitioners. It feels like we could do much more with amplifying what's going on in a very small project kind of way at the moment, so it has a wider impact. It's a bit granular, but that was my thought.
Would really welcome that. Thank you. Catherine, you had more to add.
Yeah, if that's okay. Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. So I just wanted to add a little bit to in terms of answering John's question around how do we measure impact and for children who aren't receiving the HCP, those that send support, and some of those outcomes measures in terms of education around attendance, progress and attainment and engagement are really important. I also didn't want us to lose sight of experience as a measure of our success in this space. So it's about experience and it's about outcomes. So we're really clear that we need to be talking to children and families and also schools and settings about experience as well as outcomes in terms of measuring success or challenges in these space. So I just wanted to make sure that we capture that really, because I think that's as important. The system of excellence representation is a really good question, Lissy. So John has absolutely been our representative there in terms of a head teacher with a resource base. John is standing down from that space. In fact, we had the last meeting, was that yesterday, John? I'm losing track of the weeks, or maybe the day before, for this academic year. So we will be looking for a new resource base head teacher representation at System of Excellence, but you can be assured that John has represented that group of schools exceptionally well during his tenure in System of Excellence. So again, my thanks to you for that, John. And your comment about PINS, Lissy, we're now in PINS 2. I think there's another 12 schools that are coming online for PINS 2, and yes, I would agree with you that we need to make sure that the resources are spread as widely as we possibly can around that, and we can make best use of those. And we're talking with our colleagues in the ICB about how we do that across the BSW footprint to make sure that that's accessible to as many people as possible. And if you have got evidence of where that's happened well in other ICB areas, please do let Ben know. That would be very helpful.
Thanks, Catherine. Some good discussion.
It's me again, Lisa.
John,
yeah,
you again?
Yes, me again. Sorry. Lissy, just on your point there as well, I have had, Catherine and I have had conversations, and I don't know how appropriate it would be and how democratic it needs to be, but there are some head teachers of resource base that have come to me and said they are quite interested, and I have passed on details on those people to Catherine as well. So there are some other head teachers that are interested in stepping into that hole.
Great. In your notes, it says the System of Excellence Steering Group, and it just doesn't identify that there is representation. So it's really good to know there is. And thank you, John, for that role.
I've passed it on, Lissy. I mean, I'm out of it now, so what happens is none of my business anymore. But I have shared it with head teachers. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other final questions or comments on the SEND transformation update from Ben? Okay, if not, then I propose that Schools Forum note the update on the SEND transformation programme. Do I have a seconder for that, please?
I second it, Lisa.
Thank you, John. As you've made several contributions, I think that's quite valid that you second that discussion. So thank you very much for that. I'll take the assent of the meeting to agree unless I hear otherwise. Thank you. And just ahead of moving on to the next item on the agenda, item 9, just to welcome Joe Grenfell from Wiltshire College, who's joined us this afternoon. A very warm welcome, Joe. Moving on then to item 9 on the agenda, this is the update on the FACT Partnership Transformation Programme. I'm now going to invite Simon Thomas, who's the FACT Programme Lead, to give us a brief update on the FACT Transformation Programme.
Thank you very much, Chair. So what I wanted to do this afternoon is, noting the word brief as well, I picked that up, Chair, thank you, is to do a quick update on 2 projects that we've completed and also make Forum aware of forthcoming transformation work. So the 2 projects that we have just completed on and are transferring into business as usual are the Family Help projects. So that's our early intervention and prevention, and transitional safeguarding. I'll come on to that one in a second. So the Family Help was all about early intervention and prevention, all about how different organisations, the voluntary community sector, different services, are very much a sort of social mobility, community focused model. How we can build on the existing strengths in Wiltshire and working with schools, working with early years settings and so on to provide the very best early intervention prevention so that we don't see unnecessary escalation, whether that's in the SEND world, safeguarding world and so on. So as a partnership, and it is very important, I think that we do remember this was a partnership piece of work, we identified a number of sort of system-wide, Wiltshire-wide deliverables that we wanted the project to achieve, and it has achieved them. So we have established a brand for Family Help in Wiltshire. It's that Altogether brand that you'll see behind me and on the slide. And that was in response to feedback that early help was quite disjointed in Wiltshire. So hopefully we've made good progress to join up and communicate where different services are delivering early help or family help in Wiltshire. We also have delivered on a database or an online platform, which is the Altogether platform, where people can find out whether it's people working in schools, colleagues in schools, whether it's public, families and so on, how to access services, what services are available and so on. So we've made good progress there. We've done a lot of work around workforce development, particularly around the trauma-informed approaches, relational practice, and seen a significant number of colleagues from schools accessing training around trauma-informed work, emotion coaching, and so on. I think where as well we've made important progress was we've much more consistent now, I think, in our early help system workforce around some of those core approaches, moving towards a more trauma-informed Wiltshire, if I may. And also part of the project was to implement family hubs, which hopefully, again, all colleagues are aware of. So they launched last April 24, and are sort of going from strength to strength, I would suggest. So very positive. We also did some pilot work in Warminster and Westbury, and Helen, who I know is part of Forum, and colleagues at the school, was hugely supportive, as were other schools in the area, to let us test and try new approaches. Can we go to the next slide, please, Lisa? Thanks. So what we wanted to try was just to test a more localized approach to working in this sort of early help space, about more flexibility in our approach. We were hearing that parts of our system were quite rigid, so we've said we wanted to test the benefits of working more flexibly. Working with a whole family rather than with individual family members was important to test. To try and do some work around bridging the gap in waiting lists and thresholds. So we're hearing there was a lot of delay and people waiting for support or waiting for assessment. So it was looking at what could we do there to try and improve things, and also an element of is the benefit in supporting a network of professionals so that we jointly identify together, we get to know each other, but we also support each other to share ways of working and so on. So next slide, Lisa. We can see some quantitative impact of the work in Warminster and Westbury when we did that, in terms of we looked at the exclusion rates, the attendance rates, we looked at contacts with the integrated front door, so that front door for the council's social care services, and those contacts went down. But also we worked with a group of families and then measured the distance travelled and got a sense of impact. So we had an external evaluation partner, Oxford Brookes University, working with us, which was great, really helpful. Next slide, Lisa. I know we're pushed for time, but I am going to ask you to read this, just in terms of a bit of a human story about what this different approach to working with families felt like and looked like in Warminster and Westbury. So I will give you a minute or so just to have a quick read through that. Oh, who put the heart up? That's lovely. So I think it's just an example, and I go back to that bit about flexibility. What this took in this case was the worker going in at breakfast time. This was a girl who wasn't going to school. She was too anxious. She was being sick in the morning due to her school anxiety. There was a lot of transference between mum's own mental health issues and the daughter's issues. And what the worker did was quite literally, and apologies, well, maybe no apologies, held her hair back in the morning while she was being sick and spoke to her and helped break down that anxiety. Real relational practice. Went into school alongside her, did the introductory sessions. The school were fantastic in listening and shaping and responding. And it's the human bit that we discovered was so important in this work, and it may not sound like rocket science. Sorry, Chair, I'm conscious. This is not as brief as I might have hoped. Quick next slide, please, Lisa. So apologies, this hasn't come across so well, but this is just the sense of what are the key success factors that we found, and it is about being present, it is about being relational, it is about being embedded in local communities, it is about, instead of being almost anonymous service provider, is actually being a person who gets to know the colleagues in the school, and we work together on that very, very human level, and we work together with our families. So there's a lot of together in this, and what we're now doing is we're looking to embed this into our next phase of activity. So the evaluation and the feedback tells us it works, it tells us it makes a difference. The challenge now is how do we really push this into our system as much as we can. And when I talk about in a second our next wave of work, hopefully you'll see where this fits in. So next slide, Lisa. So I won't dwell on this, but we've also been doing some work around where the family help was all children, young people and families in Wiltshire, some work around system change with a very small group of young people, and it's particularly those who are vulnerable around exploitation and risks in the community. And the piece of work was looking at how we can work, particularly when they turn 18, we could see that we had a problem in terms of the gaps and the cliff edges. So we have worked together as a group of different agencies to look at what can we learn about that, and we have brought in both practice changes, particularly in the services who are working 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 year olds, so bridging the gap between adult social care, children's social care, children's mental health, adult mental health, and so on. Really interesting piece of work, which I'm really happy to share with others. There is information on the SVPP website about it. I won't say more at this point other than to say we have implemented structural changes as well as the practice changes, and there are different services now available to this cohort through adult social care and partner agencies. And again, Lisa, next one. Sorry.
Has it not come through? I'm just seeing
No.
it on my screen.
So at the moment I've got the key success factors, but
I've got transitional safeguarding.
Scoot on another one, please. That's all right. I'm just dashing through now.
Sorry.
And another one. It feels like countdown. Two from the top row. Finally, in terms of where we're going next with our transformation activity is, hopefully you will be aware, Wellbeing in Schools Bill, Families First Partnership Programme, big pieces of government reform, legislation, policy, guidance, also NHS integrated neighbourhood teams, all coming through together. Grant mentioned as well forthcoming SEND reforms. So the piece of work we're looking to do now through our transformation programme is looking at what are the implications and how can we best respond in ways that build on our significant and many strengths in Wiltshire, but also look for the improvement opportunities that are within these different pieces of legislation and policy initiatives. And the box in the bottom right, the green box, just pulls out from an educational perspective the common and key themes that we're identifying in this context. So we will be looking at the changes and opportunities that lie in terms of safeguarding children who are not in school, links to potential expansion changes within the virtual school, looking at the interfaces between school settings and our safeguarding system. So there's a lot in this legislation, so we will be doing a significant piece of reform work locally, and engagement with settings, engagement with schools, education providers will be vital in this across the board. Multi-agency child protection arrangements are particularly explicit in terms of the roles and the interfaces with education providers. So more to come on that, I think, is probably the message at this point. But that is our focus for transformation activity, certainly for the next 12 months. And it will go beyond, I have no doubt. And we will need to integrate SEND reforms into that once we know what that's saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, and most importantly, thank you for reminding us all why we do what we do and putting the child back at the centre of our conversations, because that is so important in terms of moving everything we do forwards. So thank you for that. Has anybody got any questions or comments for Simon, please? Lizzie.
I was just reflecting on the critical role that this work has in improving attendance, because those really stuck children, I mean literally stuck children, their attendance is such a vulnerability and it's such a government priority for next year. We should be really clear with schools and other partners that this is meeting that DFE key priority.
I would absolutely agree, Lizzie, and just I think it's interesting if you look at the Wellbeing Schools Bill and the Families First Partnership, it's very explicit, isn't it, about the safeguarding agenda in relation to children not in school, those on reduced timetables, but also the link, that correlation between safeguarding and need for support and attendance at school. So it's great that it's in there, and it gives us, I think, a real opportunity to reflect on how we work together in that space as a whole system.
And that's where the Venn diagram, I think, proves so useful, isn't it? Because it is those crossovers between the different elements of it and how it all works together, which is fantastic. Okay, Simon, thank you very much for that update, and we look forward to hearing more as we go through next year in terms of the work of the transformation programme. So thank you very much for that. I propose that Schools Forum note the update on the current and future FACT projects. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you. I can't see who that is, but thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Helen. Thank you very much for seconding that. I'll take the assent of the meeting to agree unless I hear otherwise. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Then moving on to item 10 on our agenda this afternoon. This is a medical needs education and reintegration service, a MNERS traded service proposal. The purpose of this report, which is on pages 53 to 56, not 60, 53 to 56 of the agenda pack, is to brief Schools Forum on a traded service proposal and invite discussion on the medical needs, education and reintegration services. John Spring, who's our head of targeted education, will speak to this item. I'll hand over to you, John.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a nice acronym, isn't it? Nice and easy to say and remember. Just extending from what Lisa's just said there, this is around some initial thoughts. We're really keen in terms of, in line with the good practice for Schools Forum meetings, to have that honest, open conversation with Schools Forum around an idea we've got to potentially consider a traded or charged model for implementation of the MNERS provision. So this is really early stages. We're keen on thoughts and feedback from Schools Forum to inform any kind of future steps we might have. Next slide, please. So in summary, Medical Needs Education and Reintegration Service on MNERS provides tuition online and face-to-face in some cases for young people who are unable to attend school with a medical reason for non-attendance. And they discharge part of the local authority Section 19 duty. So a child, by reason of illness in this case, may not for any period receive suitable education unless such arrangements are made for them. Section 19 duty relates to children and young people of compulsory school age only and those that are resident in Wiltshire schools. MNERS have a current policy that states that consultant level medical need is required. So when there's identification of a potential need for a young person to receive education through MNERS, there'll be a consultation and liaison with the school. The school will then complete a MNERS referral. So we've got all the information around the medical need, the makeup of the young person, their SEND needs, etc., etc. MNERS will then triage that referral, and if they agree with the referral, then they will implement MNERS provision for that young person. Primary, secondary offer depends on the needs of that young person. It might be one-to-one in the home. It might be one-to-one online, it might be small group sessions online, and it also might be a wider offer around Academy 21 approved online provider, or the use of an AV1 robot, which is a bot that can go in to the school environment. The school can then deliver their lessons as normal, and that lesson is beamed out to the child's home where they can then access their learning and maintain that sense of belonging with their school environment. We are developing further our provision for Section 19 because we're very aware of the fact that that demand is increasing significantly. We know that that's a national problem. We know that that's been experienced for all local authorities. We've heard today alone with talk around attendance, emotional-based school absence, links to neurodiversity, mental health. Those are all things that Section 19 is experiencing significantly. The number of young people that are referred in is increasing, and the capacity and demands are significant, and I'll come to that more in a moment. So we are increasing our Section 19 offer, and we're doing that through increasing the number of AV1 robots that we have, and through increasing our Academy 21 procurement, or a procurement with an approved online provider yet to be determined. There's no charge for that for schools, and we would not be planning on charging schools for that. So this is about a charged model for the online tuition provided directly by MNERS. As well as that online tuition or face-to-face in the home tuition, MNERS also provides education to children and young people at Salisbury District Hospital. So those that are inpatients, so they deliver that effectively. The hospital education service in Wiltshire is MNERS, and they also support with the funding around the educational offer for those young people that are in a Tier 4 mental health ward. Again, there's no charge for either of those at the moment from schools, and that's when we're not asking for that to be charged either. As I've said, significant increase in demand for MNERS. So what we know is from 22-23 academic year, we had 53 cases, and this academic year, to date of this report, it's increased from them, but to date from this report, it's 104. What we also know is December 21, it was 1616. So you can see the significant increase in demand on the MNERS service, which is, as I said, equivalent to Wiltshire's hospital education offer. I really tried to estimate what this would mean for schools, because not all schools have young people that have a Section 19 duty considered. Not all schools have MNERS cases active. So it's very difficult to average that out, but in the interest of transparency, I've tried to do that for you. So really, lots of primaries won't it won't ever have had a case where a young person's at section 19 or receiving MNERS support. But really it's between 0 and 1 young people or children per primary school. And in secondaries, again, we have lots of secondaries that don't have any young people that are receiving support from MNERS and haven't done this academic year, but roughly on average that might look like 2 to 3 children per secondary school in an academic year. Next slide, please. So the plan is to utilise some of the school's ALPU funding to then provide for some of the service that MNERS is providing. There would be an initial free period of around 8 weeks. Sometimes a MNERS referral will be put in and a young person will receive some MNERS support, and then usually after a physical health issue are then reintegrated back into school, and that can sometimes be within 8 weeks. So there are cases where there would be no charge under MNERS. Equally, we have cases of MNERS that are open for over a year. So we wanted to have a plan initially around a free 8 week period where there's no charge for the school, and that also supports the challenge that we appreciate that schools have around you set your budgets well in advance, and this is retrospective, so you won't be able to remove a teacher from post because you don't have sufficient funds. So we acknowledge that, and we wanted to give that 8 weeks grace period to try and enable schools to have additional planning time and consideration around budgets. We appreciate that's a real challenge. Following that 8 week period, the plan is potentially for schools to then be charged 50% of their ALPU funding for the period that young person is receiving support from MNERS. So if it's 30 weeks, there'll be an 8 weeks grace period, and then 22 weeks, the school would be receiving a charge from MNERS of 50% of the ALPU for that child based on whether they're primary, secondary, etc. So roughly speaking, and these are rough figures, based on a 6 months MNERS provision, that would roughly look like £665 to be charged from a primary school and £998 to be charged from a secondary school. Just to note, we do have year 11s, of course, that receive MNERS support. If there was a referral post-January for a year 11 to receive MNERS support, there wouldn't be that 8 weeks grace period for obvious reasons around the timings that remain for that young person before they remove from role on the last Friday in June. So it would just be a straight 25% ALPU charge for the period of MNERS input until the last Friday in June, or if it was sooner. Based on that, and again, these are rough calculations, very difficult with how we run data around MNERS cases and how long they're open for. But last academic year in 23-24, that would look like the local authority receiving £126,000 based on the number of cases that we had and how open they were, and that 8 weeks grace period. Next slide, please. So why, other than the significant increase in pressure and demand on the local authority, what we do know from arranging education for children who cannot attend school because of health needs, so from the DFA December 2023, it states that where a child remains on the roll of their home school but requires a period of time in alternative provision due to their health needs, the local authority and home school may wish to consider the transfer of a portion of the school's funding associated with that child to the alternative provision. This would ensure that the funding follows the child. What we do know is we've done a fair bit of research with other local authorities. None of this is published anywhere, so obviously each local authority has a different approach to what is hospital education. Some will have pupil referral units in place and they will deliver their hospital education through that. Some have maintained hospital education schools or academy equivalents. We obviously don't have that model in Wiltshire. What we know is the local authorities listed there, and that list isn't exhaustive, just from those that we've had been able to have conversations with, have a charging mechanism in place for their medical hospital provision, some of which might be a PRU approach, some of which will be charging ALPU, and some of which is a flat rate charge as soon as medical provision is implemented. So we know that other local authorities are doing this as well, and certainly some of that is in relation to increasing demand and pressure around Section 19. This is not about making profit at all. All of the funds that we would receive from this approach would be put back into the MNERS provision offer and would therefore directly support the schools, children, young people that we aim to support in terms of improving outcomes. That would either be increasing the ability to staff through teachers or associated resources. It might be having more AV1 robots, for example, so that we can have more of them out in school. At the moment, we have 10 that are in use and they cost around £3,000 per unit with a 3-year on cost around support from the company that we procure them from, which is called No Isolation. I think that's it. Next slide. No, that is it. Thank you. So really keen on feedback from colleagues in Schools Forum. So to sorry, back to you, Chair, but opening it up to questions.
Thank you very much, John. Has anybody got any questions or comments for John, which I know he would welcome, please? Unverified head, John, I think that might be you.
Oh, good guess. Yeah, it was me. John, that's really interesting. I suppose that there's a bit there though that I'm a bit concerned about. There was a section towards the end about it said the funding. So that last paragraph about alternative provision, obviously coming from the local authority high need budget. And moving money for agreeing with schools portions of the budgets for from the schools, from that maybe from their ORPU or their top up into to going towards this. Could you just explain a little bit more about that?
So I'm trying to understand your question, John. Sorry, John. So I
suppose what I'm saying is I think from a school's perspective, I got concerns about that. And I can't imagine there being that many schools that are going to be able to find out, because budgets are incredibly difficult in schools, really difficult. We're all making really difficult decisions, and these things happen, and children absolutely need this provision, but the school can't provide that provision. But that money that comes into the school is to pay for the education of the school, and a lot of that money is kind of earmarked. It's set aside. People have been employed, contracts have been signed, provision has to roll on anyway. I don't know where schools would be able to how they would be able to do that. So is this a deal breaker?
Yeah, so look, we accept that feedback completely, and I hear what you're saying, and I guess all I'm sharing here in this slide around that rationale that you've just pointed out, and that statement comes from the DfE guidance directly. That's what the DfE are stating is with this concept of the funding following a child, and that will obviously be about the fact that school are, yes, absolutely have budgets in place, have already associated staffing to that well in advance of then identifying a child that would need MNERS provision. That's why we've got the 8 weeks grace period. I know that doesn't fix the problem, but it's something to try and give you some time to have that for us to have that appreciation of the challenges faced to give schools. So yeah, we take that feedback on completely, and we know that places pressures on schools.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I'd be really mindful of, because the project, it's good work, obviously it is, and it makes absolute sense. I just think the bit that's going to really, schools are going to think, hang on a minute, what's going on? How on earth are we going to do this? And it's all well and good, isn't it, for the DfE to suggest that, but the reality is I can't think of any, none of my colleagues would be able to do that, I don't think. Something to think about. Thank you.
Really helpful. Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. And that was a question that was raised at WASH as well, which Helen might be just about to pick up.
I'm not sure it's the WASH point, but I was going to say, John, we have probably 5 or 6 students on average who access MNERS in a year, and very rarely are they short term. Unfortunately, it tends to be longer term, and we would struggle with that. I wondered, hearing about the cost of the AV robots, which we also use. We've had a lot of students and teachers struggling to make a success of that for young people, and having a better experience with Academy 21. Is it worth going out to colleagues to find out about what does work for these people before we invest further in the robots or in Academy 21?
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. Thanks for that. And I won't give specifics around school, but what I will say is where a school has 4 to 5 young people in MNERS, it's likely that some of those will be Academy 21 young people, and we would not be charging at any point for that provision, just to be clear. So this is only for the aspect of MNERS provision directly through online tutoring. So no schools have 4 to 5 just for that aspect. So some of yours might then be Academy 21, but no, absolutely note that. Yeah, really keen on feedback from colleagues around what is working well. We were trying to make the Section 19 provision as vast and broad as we possibly can, so we can catch all, and we can really tailor what we're offering to to schools and to young people. Sometimes MNERS is exactly what a young person needs. Sometimes it's a bespoke AP through our WAP list at significant cost to the LA. Sometimes it's a robot and they keep that sense of belonging. That works really well for them. And sometimes online tuition has worked really well. So we're trying to expand that. What we've also done, and just touching on some of the things that have come out earlier, we've we've had agreement for some EBSA mentors, and we've got an advert out at the moment for attendance re-engagement officers through Education Welfare Service, and those roles will work on going into the family home for those young people that are able to come out of their bedroom, that can only access things online, to support that reintegration plan. So we're reducing the time that young people are spending on MNERS or receiving Section 19, because some of those, as you've said, can be significantly long periods of time, which then would place a further financial burden on schools. So we are actually looking at the whole picture, and this is one very, very specific part of it. But I take on board completely what you're saying around feedback from schools. Anybody absolutely value that, and I'll make sure we're proactively seeking that from schools before we would procure any more AV1 bots. I do think there's a place for them, I do, but I appreciate there's some understandable challenges and pressures from schools around what that looks like and how logistically we would manage that.
Lizzie, thank you, Helen.
I thought it was a good paper. I think the voice of the child and the school is just missing at the moment for me. And I was thinking, I've got some experience from colleagues of those bots working successfully and not successfully, from not personally, but I hear what you're saying about those. But for primary age children, there's a role for the school to be potentially a partner. Most primary schools have got an ELSA or a PSA or somebody who, you know, how might that sense of belonging and engagement with the school work most successfully? It feels like there's a missing piece in there. And I suppose my other thought was that 8 weeks grace is less important to me than a cut-off. As Helen said, some of these children are going to have a long-term need, and then that's really prohibitive for a school and is frightening, frankly, because you've got an open book then. So it felt like the other way around would be beneficial, that schools pay for a set amount and that there's a maximum within a year that a school might be asked to contribute, rather than a grace period. So it's a challenging conundrum. I understand the rising numbers and the need for schools to contribute potentially. It feels like there's a bit more thinking to do with the sector about actually what could be done to support if that resource is so scarce.
Yeah, Lisa, thanks for that. It's really, really helpful. I've not given thought to flipping the model and actually having a maximum period. I think the key for us is around maximising the ability and the prospects of reintegration into that school environment, particularly an environment that they already know and they should have some form of sense of belonging to. So it's around ways of ensuring that's achievable. I don't think for one second that if we flip the model, we would have schools going, well, once I've hit my 6 months, I don't need to do anything at all. We've got an incredibly inclusive set of schools. So I'm really comfortable there, and that's really positive feedback. On the first point you made, we're changing the model for September so that schools hopefully will be present in Section 19 panel discussions. So we've really got that ability to make sure that they're well informed, that it's transparent, we get the voice of the school. We've taken that to WASH to have those conversations, and I plan on taking it further with other colleagues to make sure that we've got that primary representation as well around that view. And the aim is, from September, in an ideal world, we would have schools presenting a Section 19 case and us having a collective discussion around what that young person needs. We'll also have MISA representation, mainstream inclusion support advisors, within that, amongst multiple other agency involvements. So we're able to have those really meaningful conversations around what does this child need, and we can all collectively come to that understanding. We get some really good examples of pupil voice from the parents for Section 19, and we actively encourage that. We often have written pieces from young people, drawings, pictures, etc., around what they would like, what they want their school to look like, what they want their education to feel like, and that's the most powerful. And that's usually when I say yes to Section 19, because it's the hardest pulling on your heartstrings, isn't it? So that's something we are certainly keen on and trying to promote as much as we can. But thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much for those contributions and discussions, John. I hope that's helpful, and we certainly all recognise and appreciate the increase in the volume in the cases and workload. But I think it's also worth noting that schools put in a huge amount of work before they get to the stage where it's coming to you with Section 19, and that's where the crossover and that consultation opportunity for those conversations at that panel might actually be really helpful in terms of accessing those other support mechanisms before it needs to come that those young people come onto your books, if you like. But interesting to see how this plays out and moves forward, and what that looks like as a final decision, if you like. I do take on board what Helen's saying and Lizzie's saying in terms of an end point, because some of these, they are ongoing, and that's not helpful. And to know where that funding is going to finish rather than when it's going to start might be equally useful for consideration. And going back to John's original point, a point that I made previously was that, you know, we are still expected to provide for that young person, so we can't withdraw the teachers and the people that are cooking their lunches and things like that, because we are still expected to make that provision. So that loss of AUPU, although understandably is going towards their education, we still are expected to have that availability for when they return into mainstream as well. So it's just keeping that on board at the same time. But I hope that's been useful, John.
Incredibly useful, yeah, valued input from everybody, and really appreciate everyone's support around what is a difficult decision. So we'll take this away and then come back if we've got anything further, if we decide to go down that route. So thank you, everybody.
And I think if anybody's got any further comments that they want to make after this afternoon, then forward those to Lisa and she can then channel those through to John. Okay, I'm going to make a call because I think we've probably got about another 25 minutes, half an hour to go. So I'm going to make the call to keep going. Does anybody dissent to that thought? Rather than taking a comfort break. Okay, nobody's saying yes, they want it, let's crack on. Okay, so in terms of John's paper then, I propose that we note all of those comments that have been made. If there are any further comments, then can we make sure that those go forward to Lisa to be passed on to John, please? Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Lovely, David. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Helen, for being a double proposer, a double seconder. I don't know what that's called, but we'll take it anyway. I'm going to take the assent of the meeting to agree unless I hear otherwise. Thank you. Then moving on to item 11 this afternoon. There's an awful lot of information here, but Marie, this is an F40 update that I requested. The purpose of this report, which is on pages 57 to 73 of the agenda pack, is to present Schools Forum with an update of the work of the F40 campaigning group, which comprises of the lowest 43 funded local authorities in the country, of which Wiltshire is a member, and you will have picked up from the document, I'm sure, is quite near the bottom. Marie, I'll hand over to you for this item, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I hope that this report may trigger some more discussion than some of the earlier items in the agenda. So, as Lisa said, the F40 membership has increased to 43, which is the highest I've known it. And I think that's because there are so many local authorities and with their schools feeling the pinch as funding gets tighter. Grant always says this is a club that we don't want to be a member of, but I'm very glad that we are, because there's plenty of good work happening, and also lots of good work planned, which should hopefully reap some benefits for us. So the first part of the report talks about what the F40 have been up to over the last sort of 12 months during 24-25. And I suppose the highlights for me are the briefing for the MPs that were held in Westminster. And John, your predecessor, Laura, used to do some great lobbying on our behalf with regards to roping the local MPs of Wiltshire into this. There's a webinar on SEND, a conference for members in London, and all those things have gone down incredibly well. I think the most important thing, though, is the MP's briefing in Westminster. And that additionally, there have been submitted written evidence to the Public Accounts Select Committee and the Education Select Committee, and rather interestingly, a session on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, which I sadly missed. So with regard to the future, there'll be more campaigning on our behalf, particular focus on SEND and the deficit situation, which could tie in nicely with clearly what the unfinished work at DFE level on the SEND reforms, inclusion and intervention, which rings true with our themes, lack of local authority SEND places, again that's always a struggle for us, independent provision, and OAP, ordinarily available support. There's going to be a focus in the next 12 months on the national funding formula, both for schools and for high needs, and these two are so intrinsically linked. It's almost impossible to deal with them separately, really. So that's really good news. Over the page on page 58, what I've done is I've looked at our position in the league tables, and with all the appendices, I don't intend to go through them, but they are really well written, and I hope you've had a chance to. If you're a visual learner, then you'll like the graphs, and if you're a lists person, then you'll like the lists. But either way, it's really clear. that we are right down the bottom of those league tables. For the gross DSG funding, so that includes everything, we are the 18th lowest in the country. So out of those 151 local authorities, we're the 18th lowest. That's pretty poor. And also not just we're the lowest, we're significantly lower funded. So 36.46% lower funding per mainstream pupil than the highest funded local authority, which is really huge. For high needs funding, which is the other set of data, again, out of 151 local authorities, we're the 20th lowest. So perhaps a bit better until you look at the percentage difference between us and the highest funded local authority, which is 69.64% lower. And we all know that the reason, largely the reason for that is because 50% of our high needs funding is based on the actual expenditure from 2017-18, which is woefully out of date. Having said that, the DFE have got quite a challenge to move away from that formula because other local authorities will have been committed at higher levels of funding. That's the main bones of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Marie, very much indeed for sharing that. Has anybody got any questions or comments for Marie on that, please? Thank you. Whoever that is, I can't see, sorry.
Karen, I think.
Karen, hello.
Yeah,
Hi, Karen, thank you.
Marie, you know this question's going to come in from me. Do the early years not appear on the F40? Because, you know, we suffer as much as anybody else. I know it's very hard for schools, but, you know, our minimum wage and all that kind of stuff is exactly the same for early years as it is for anybody else, but we're lower funded.
Factors. Absolutely. They don't seem to focus so much on the early years, although generally when they're talking about their gross expenditure, that does they talk about the spend as a whole. It does seem to be a gap with the F40. And it could be something, you know, that this group could take forward. As obviously it would be something that Schools Forum might like to take forward, or you as chair as the early years reference group would like to feed back to the F40. I've got all the details.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, because I think it's very much sometimes swept under the carpet that the challenges we face, you know, our funding is also incredibly low within Wiltshire and in a very similar position, but actually our costs are the same, you know, across the whole country or whatever. So yeah, I think that would be great to have a discussion with the F40 about it, to be honest.
They're quite careful, Karen, in all of their communications to talk about education generally. They don't call out post-16 as a separate cohort either, or primary or secondary. They tend to talk about education in its more, you know, general form and talk about blocks of funding rather than separate bits. But it's certainly something we could raise with them.
I mean, something that's a real challenge for the early years sector is recruitment and retention. You know, and that's something that the F40 haven't really looked at in depth. So, you know, it might be something that once they've sorted out SEN for us, perhaps they could move on to that.
And I think the funding formula focus for the next 12 months will be interesting as well, because the move theoretically from the soft to the hard formula. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, John, you've got your hand up.
I have, thank you, Chair. I've stayed as quiet as I can, listening and learning throughout the meeting, but I do have to say this is an area that I feel really strongly and passionate about. And whilst the latest data for 25-26 does show us seeing some improvements, the fundamental inequality absolutely persists. And I was doing some research, and I had a wonderful PowerPoint from Marie, who made
exciting. Remember, it was an exciting PowerPoint.
Fascinating. Sat me down and wouldn't let me move without cramming these numbers down my throat. And the fact that we've got London boroughs who are getting twice the funding that we're getting, in some instances thrice the funding that we're getting, frankly, is just not acceptable. So I could waffle on for hours sounding outraged, but I won't, because you've all got far more important things to do. But I do want to make a slight ask, if I might, Chair, of you in our schools, which is that I'm more than happy to carry on the lobbying that my predecessor was doing with the MPs. I intend to be a consistent pain in the neck for them. giving them a hard time on these things, and whilst they're getting it sorted. I also can bring some influence to bear as the deputy chair of the LGA Children's Board and come in from that direction, and obviously through our F40 campaign. But what would be really helpful would be to have some tangible evidence from schools where you're able to tell me the impact this is having and the disadvantage our young people are having because of this. I don't normally want to know bad news because I don't like bad news. But in this instance, if you've got something where you can say to me, look, councillor, if we'd had our fair share of funding, this experience is something our young people could have been doing, or this is something we could have done that would have helped narrow that education gap that's still too wide in Wiltshire, or anything like that. I'm all ears for that, because what I want to do is drown these people in evidence that they need to make a change. So I will sit back now, but we just mustn't accept that a child's postcode should determine their educational opportunities. And this fair funding campaign isn't just about money. It's about fairness, equality, and giving every child the chance to reach their full potential.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And those are the conversations we've been having now for quite some time. And a number of us went up and raised those at Parliament previously and continue to lobby our MPs on those conversations every time we meet with them. That is a constant conversation that we are having. Unfortunately, some of our local MPs don't know about F40. Certainly two that I've spoken to in recent months had no clue what it was. And I certainly pointed them in the right direction and sent them all of the information. So I do think there's a piece of work to do as well in making sure that people know what the F40 stands for. And I think as Schools Forum, we've got a responsibility collectively in that, in making sure that our local MPs across the county have got that understanding and know what it's about. And I certainly think that summary of papers that Marie's put together could be useful for making sure that that happens.
Well, what I'm happy to do, not in the meeting here, but if you send me the details of those MPs who weren't fully aware of that offline, I'll happily make an appointment to spend time with them and educate them accordingly.
Great, thank you very much for that. We appreciate that support. Brett had his hand up, but I think he's taken it down.
You kind of answered it, Lisa. I was talking about what I was going to ask about what we could actively do as head teachers, but I'm very happy to write to my MP and make sure that she's fully aware.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Lissy, you've got your hand up.
I'm happy to do the same, but I suppose, John, I was just interested to know whether you'd visited a school in one of the better funded areas. We've got a network that we work with in Greenwich, which is the other end of the funding, and it's just absolutely stark when you walk around, the contrast between what they're able to offer and then that follows through in the children's outcomes. So the impact on the children, the staff, the workload, the well-being of the entire school community, as well as the outcomes, you can just see it. So that, in a way, is the most powerful way to see the differential.
And I think, Lissy, that might be worth a conversation with Councillor Hubbard again offline to reiterate those things that you've seen and you've been able to experience through that partnership, because that is really powerful, isn't it? And it does really clarify. Thank you for that. Stella, you've got your hand up.
Hi, yeah, sorry. I just wanted to just seek a clarification to make sure I'd understood this correctly, and to ask a question about kind of build on the evidence-based question. So in terms of clarification, I think I'd understood, and this is my naivety, I think I'd understood that the national funding formula would remove a lot of this unfairness, and I think a lot of people think that. I think that is a common parlance. So I'm quite surprised to be reminded that actually the high needs block funding is where this is remaining really unfair. So I just wanted, so my point of clarity was I wanted to check that I'm understanding that correctly, because I think that's there is a discourse, isn't there, that the national funding formula fixes all this, and I think that might be an important thing to challenge. And the other thing I wanted to ask is, has anybody done any research on whether there is a correlation between the county's funding levels and the county's attainment levels. So speaking in terms of the language that the DFE and RISE teams understand, has that kind of relationship been identified?
Not by me, Stella, that second one. But isn't it fascinating? That would be a really, excuse me, interesting piece of data to look at. And I would imagine quite straightforward to put together.
Yeah, I
on the
mean,
face of it.
obviously, you know, you wouldn't necessarily be able to assign cause, but correlation is the next best thing, right? So
Absolutely.
I'd be really keen to see that if that's something that would be possible to do.
There was something on one of the F40 papers where they were looking at the attainment and compared to the funding as well. So it might be worth Marie looking back through some of the things that have come
on their
through
website.
previously.
Might be easiest.
Yeah, but I think, Stella, going back to your first point in terms of the funding formula and the perception that sorted everything out, I think that is well worth raising and making clear that that's actually not the case. And certainly with high needs, that's all to do with the historic funding and where that comes from.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Stella, for high needs in particular, 50% of the funding that goes into the model is based on 2017-18 expenditure levels. So in 2017-18, ours was very low. So
I think I knew that, but I think I hadn't worked out that wouldn't be resolved under the national funding formula.
Well, I suppose we don't know what that's going to look like.
Although we're fully where we should be in terms of working towards it, and I completely understand why Camden aren't, assuming they aren't.
So the whole country is working towards schools block NFF. So that's where we are being told what we're working towards. The high needs block, this is talking about the way that they fund local authorities. So it's one conversation is about how the local authority funds schools, and that's towards on the schools block NFF, so there's more sort of parity across there. But the way that the DFE fund the local authority is sort of a slightly separate conversation, and that's where we're really struggling.
Okay, I need to understand that a little bit better, I think.
So feel free to get in touch.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you. Anyway, thank you, really helpful. Thank you.
Brett, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just a follow up from what I just said before. Do we as a group have any like sample letters or standard letters that we could use for our MPs, or is there anything that Marie has or has come across that we could use to lobby our local elected members of parliament?
Marie's in a difficult position because do you want to mention it, Marie?
So I'm in a politically restricted post, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to draft anything. It might be that the chair might like to draft something and share with peers, or write on behalf of Chairs Forum. I would work closely with John to make sure that any correspondence he wanted to share, we'd discuss together.
Yeah, understood. That's fine.
And there are things that have gone out previously. Helen's put her hand up, but there are things that have gone out previously from WASH. There are things that have gone out previously from councillors that we might be able to use to put something together. And if we feel as Schools Forum that we want to put something out, then we can.
I've also got something that I put together from the early years. I sent it out shortly before all the elections, so my intention is to send it out again as chair of the early years reference group. So I've also got something that I'm happy to put into the mix if it's helpful.
And I am happy to again as chair of WASH on behalf of WASH to express our support for the F40 group.
Fab. Thanks, Helen. I think the more we do it, the better. And Graham, you might want to do the same. I don't know, are you chairing PHF? But the more that we do, I think the stronger, the more voices that are heard, the stronger a message it's giving. Okay, Marie, thank you very much for that. And I really do think it's worth keeping us updated on the F40 as we move forward, and certainly as the funding decisions come through. So I propose that Schools Forum note the work of the F40 and the value and support it adds to us as one of the most poorly funded local authorities. And we consider, as we move forward, sending some letters in support of the F40 to our MPs so that we can make sure that the action continues. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Helen, very much. Thank you, Stella, as a thirder or a seconder, whichever way we're going to put it. I'll take the assent of the meeting to agree unless I hear otherwise. Thank you. So moving on to item 12 of our agenda this afternoon, this is the annual schools consultation, and this is about transfer of the funding from the schools block to the high needs block for 2026-27. The purpose of this report, which can be found on pages 75 to 78 of the agenda, is to brief Schools Forum on the consultation to be sent to schools in the autumn of 2025 on the principles and value of any block transfer from schools block to high needs block in the 2026-27 financial year. And I'm going to hand over to Liz for this item, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, so this really is a precursor to us issuing a consultation to schools on a transfer from schools block into the high needs block. We have consulted with schools for the last at least 5 or 6 years, I think, and have had a principle of Schools Forum has generally agreed a transfer from schools block into high needs block as long as that's been affordable within the overall national funding formula. Last year, we consulted on a transfer of 1% from schools block into the high needs block. That is an assumption that's built into our safety valve agreement that we would consult on that value each year. In order to do or achieve a transfer of 1%, we then need to seek Secretary of State permission in order to do that. So in order to apply for that disapplication from the rules, we also need to demonstrate that we've consulted with schools and share with the Secretary of State what the views of our schools are. So if we are going to do a 1% block transfer after this consultation, there's a process that we then need to go through. So this is very similar to the proposal that we brought last year. I have detailed in the paper the kind of information that I would expect to include with a consultation. We obviously will consult on 1%. We need to think about whether there are other options that we also put into the consultation. You'll remember that last year we consulted on a 1% block transfer, but actually when we came to make a decision, we looked at the views of schools in the responses to that consultation, and we also looked at what the indicative funding settlement was, both for the high needs block and for schools block, and made our decision kind of in the round, taking all of that into account. So I think a couple of things on that. Firstly, I hope that you'd be assured that this is a genuine consultation and we are really seeking views so that we can bring that whole decision-making process back to Schools Forum. And the second thing is that I think we have last year when we consulted, we didn't have any view on what the funding settlement was going to be for either schools block or high needs block. So we consulted using the 24-25 figures, and then obviously had to do quite a bit of work after the consultation had closed to update on what that would look like for schools in 25-26. We are hopeful that we will have some indicative funding information before we go out to consultation. Historically, we have had provisional funding information towards the end of the July term, and that's enabled us to have some provisional indication of what things are likely to look like before we do that consultation. I think surmising from some of the announcement in the spending review yesterday, we have a little bit of that equation in that we've got some indication of what schools funding could look like for next year, but there were no announcements on what any increases in the high needs block might look like. So I don't think we've got a complete enough picture yet to really put context on. But there's a couple of things I just wanted to raise today. Firstly, I've detailed in the paper the kind of information that I would expect to put into the consultation. That is very similar to last year. I want to reassure schools that we did listen to the feedback we had last year on how the consultation was circulated and how it was made available to schools and how easy it was to actually complete. And we will take that on board, and I will work with colleagues to find a better and more accessible way to actually issue that consultation and to collect the results. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about, which would be new for this year, when we model the impact of what a 1% transfer could look like, you will remember when we circulated the modelling last year that some schools had a zero contribution to the cost, or they wouldn't experience a reduction, and some schools therefore had a relatively higher experience a relatively higher contribution. And that is because when we consulted on this last year, we made the assumption, in line with the operational guidance for schools funding, that all of the existing protections that are in the formula, so the minimum funding guarantee and the minimum per pupil funding level, are not impacted by the block transfer and any reduction that we would apply. That is in line with the regulations, but it would be possible for us if we were looking to apply a reduction across all schools rather than just those who are in excess of minimum per pupil level. We could also apply for a disapplication to reduce the minimum per pupil funding level for our schools, and therefore apply a reduction to everybody. That would also need a request to the Secretary of State in order for us to do that, and therefore we would need to consult with schools on doing it. So I'm raising the question here as to whether you want us to consult with schools at the same time on whether we should make any or seek permission to make any changes to the minimum per pupil funding level and the minimum funding guarantee, so that we can collect all of that information in one go. And therefore, if we are looking to make a higher block transfer, when it comes to the December-January Schools Forum, we've got everything in place to enable us to do that. But it would also enable us to model the impact for schools, both with the protections in place and without the protections in place, and it would enable you to see both of those outcomes, so that you can see the relative impact on your schools of both scenarios. So a question really for Schools Forum. This isn't us saying we want to go to the Secretary of State and reduce the minimum per pupil funding level. This is us saying, do you want us also to consult on this, so that we can put everything in front of you in one go, if that makes sense, and have all of the information there, and you can clearly see what the options are, and we would then make a decision after all of that consultation when we bring it back to you as to what we actually do in terms of seeking disapplications and block transfers. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm happy to take any questions and comments on that.
And can I just confirm, Liz, that there were some local authorities that did do that last year, that made that request, and that had been supported?
I'm only aware of 2 councils who had actually sought and had a disapplication agreed for reducing the minimum per pupil funding level. So it's not a common thing to do. And obviously we've just looked at a paper on our relative position in terms of funding as part of the F40, and we know that our schools are not well funded, so it's not something we would want to do lightly, but obviously it is an option open to us if we're looking at how across our school community.
Okay, Ed, you've got a question.
Hi Liz, thank you for this, and I thank you also for the transparency around the reflecting on the point of getting this consultation out as widely as possible to as many people with busy head teachers, and we as well, I myself as PHF will be really encouraging colleagues that I know to complete the consultation, because the more responses that we get, the more useful the consultation is. So yeah, thank you for that. I would say in answer to your question in terms of consulting on reducing per pupil funding, then it makes sense to put that into one consultation, so that you've got all of those. If that's what you're saying, then I think that makes good sense. My question would be that if the responses to the consultation are on the whole similar or equates to last year's outcomes of consultation, could we expect a similar outcome in terms of what happened last time?
I think it's absolutely the question that you should be asking me. I think that's really difficult. I suppose what I would say is exactly what I said this time last year. You're right that the more responses we have to this consultation, the better informed any decision will be. We absolutely recognise that schools are in a difficult position with regard to their funding, and therefore any proposal to have an impact on national funding formula rates is likely to be unpopular. It's really interesting, actually, that in the feedback we had to the last consultation, so many respondents recognised the wider issues as well as the impact on their own school, and that was really helpful to see in terms of building that kind of feeling of what schools were saying, was that actually this wasn't just schools saying no, hands off my money. This is really seriously schools taking a serious view on the overall or the wider high needs position, as well as schools funding, and responding in that way. So I think that's really helpful. I think we will listen in exactly the same way as we did last year and come back to Schools Forum to get a decision on that. What we don't want is for us to. What I think was really helpful about last year's response was that we were able to reach a consensus with yourselves on what the best approach was in the context of all the responses, and my commitment would be that we would do exactly the same again. So it is really worth responding to this consultation so that we've got all the data in front of us, and then when we get back to the December meeting, hopefully we will have enough information on the funding settlement to enable us to make that really informed decision in the context of everything. So I'm committing to being as open and as transparent as we were last year, but I can't preempt the decision.
And I think just to add into that as well, Liz, you and I met numerous times and had numerous conversations around that as well, so that even if things didn't come to the full Schools Forum, I was still involved in those conversations to move that consultation through the process. Do you want to come back, Ed?
Just to say, yeah, thank you for that. And I wonder whether there's scope, as this heads further down the road, of giving heads opportunity just to, in some way, like either like a Teams meeting or something like that, where we can explain the implications of everything. Because sometimes these things come through on a bit of paper, don't they? And it's a bit like, not entirely sure, especially new head teachers, etc. I think I'm wondering whether we could, as well as when we send the consultation out, have an opportunity for heads to engage with yourself or whoever is most appropriate to explain the ins and outs of it.
Absolutely, more than happy to do that. We can do that via a webinar. We can do it through PHF and WASH, whichever you think is the most appropriate way to do it. Or we could have a Schools Forum webinar. There's a number of ways in which we could do that. So yeah.
Thank you.
John, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Liz. I think as well, just thinking back and reflecting on last year's the consult. You know, we did get a consult out. It would be good to get that consult out a bit earlier to head teachers this year. Yep. And the uptake of the consult, whilst we were, you know, it was all right, but it could have been much better. And I do think, after speaking to colleagues at things like at PHF, through the union meetings, things like that, there is a lot of head teachers look at this and they do get a bit bamboozled and confused by it. I think to de-jargonise it as much as possible, put it out there for absolutely anybody. Imagine your head teacher who's just started in the job, has never been ahead before, never sat through budget meetings, anything like that before, needs to see it exactly what this means for your school. And whilst that might not always be the most comfortable, I think it's really important from a transparency perspective that we get that out as soon as possible, and it's broken down to, as you know, you've already kind of alluded to, simple visuals of what this would mean and what these different scenarios mean.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that on board.
Stella, your hand's next.
Thank you. Yes, I completely agree with the others about different ways of getting this information out. So, you know, events, teams, and so on, and totally support the idea of getting the consultation out earlier. I don't think that should mean that the consultation would be closed earlier, though. And Liz, you won't be surprised to know that I'm going to say it's really important that you consult with governors as well as head teachers on this. This is a school finance decision, and the governors and the head teachers should be talking about it. But governors should certainly be fully aware of what's going on as well.
Yep, completely agree. And I know we had a conversation last year about how that consultation got out to governors, and we'd be looking to change that this year. So I hope to have an early conversation with you about how we do that.
Perfect. And it might not be too late to make sure that this consultation is in the scheme of delegation planner that goes out from Governor Services to the schools that subscribe to Governor Services, because this should be on everybody's finance agenda at the start of term.
Yep, that's helpful. Yeah, we can do that. I think we just were slightly too late to do that last year, and therefore that set us back. But
Yeah,
I'll
let's
make
try and
sure
get
we
it
do
in
it
this
early
time.
this time.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Chair.
Helen, over to you.
Yes, I mean we've almost covered this now, but I was just going to stress, last year we mentioned the need to make it from an administrative point of view as accessible as possible. I know some people felt it was buried on Right Choice and they wanted it as accessible as possible. I know that we've taken that on board. Just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, I will do. I think we'll find a different way of making it available this time that doesn't necessarily rely on it going through Right Choice.
Or put it on Right Choice along with other options
Along with
as
others.
well. You know, it's almost better to bomb people with it in as many places as possible so that they've got no chance of missing it anywhere. So whether it goes through WASH PHF as well as being on Right Choice, as well as going out to head teachers and the head teachers' emails directly, I think as many places as possible is a better solution. And Liz very happy to offer my services to check anything through before it goes anywhere else. In terms of that, is this going to be appropriate for somebody who's new into role and doesn't have a clue what this is all about, really? So happy to support with that. Okay, any other questions or comments for Liz on that paper? The only thing is the decision about the consultation on the MFG and the MPPFL, which I think the viewpoint would be to do it all in one go and get as much information as possible, even if we end up not using it. Does everybody agree about that? Any dissent to that? I can't see any hands or anybody saying no. So I think, Liz, that's a steer with that one. So I propose that Schools Forum confirm the supporting information that will be used in the consultation for the block transfer for 26-27 and agree that as part of that we will include the MPPFL and the MFG questions as part of that consultation as well, so that it's a complete picture. Do I have a seconder for that proposal, please? Thank you, Stella, very much indeed. That's really useful conversation, and something we do continue to work really hard to work together on. I think that's the key thing here. It is a collective, and the more transparent we are with each other as we move through it, the better. So thank you, Liz, for your work and support, and Catherine and everybody else at the local authority for keeping that transparency going, because that does help and pays off. Okay, so moving on to, sorry, I will take the assent of the meeting to agree on those two proposals unless I hear otherwise. Thank you. I would have been in trouble with Lisa if I hadn't read that out at the end of that item, so I hope I'm off the hook with that one now. Moving on to item 13 this afternoon. This is the annual schools consultation on delegation of central expenditure for 26-27, including the delegation of school improvement functions. Purpose of this report, which can be found on pages 79 to 81 of the agenda, is to brief Schools Forum and seek agreement on the set of questions to be sent out to all maintained schools in the autumn of 25. I'm going to hand over to Grant for this item that many of us have seen many times before. Grant, over to you for this one.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Yeah, absolutely right. This is an annual consultation that we go through for the maintained schools only on this one. So colleagues from Academy Schools, you can have a quick breather whilst we run through this one. Basically, this is a consultation around the de-delegation. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term de-delegation, it literally means what we're supposed to do in terms of school funding is we delegate all the funding out to the maintained schools and you choose how you're going to spend it. But you can de-delegate some back to the local authority for some of the services that we can provide for you centrally, so that you gain from the economies of scale and the knowledge that those services are going to be provided by a recognised team from the local authority. So like you say, Lisa, absolutely, this is a paper that we see every single year coming through. And basically what we're asking of maintained schools is, would you like us to delegate the funding to you, or would you prefer to de-delegate it back, knowing those services will be provided? And this consultation is only for maintained schools, so it doesn't apply to academy schools. It doesn't apply to special schools either, because we can't de-delegate from special schools either. It does relate to primary and secondary maintained schools only. And the consultation question that comes out is for a range of services, and I'll just quickly list those. That's the free school meal eligibility service, the access budget software planning license, the trade union facility time costs, maternity costs for teachers, the EMAS service, ethnic minority achievement service, traveller education, behaviour support, and also we built in school improvement services. That used to come as a separate consultation to you. We've now wrapped it in because it is a de-delegated service in effect. And of those services there, primary schools can come up with a different response to secondary schools. So it may well be that there's a difference between the two sectors as such. But of the outcomes from the consultation, we've got several options that may come through there. And historically, schools have been very keen to de-delegate funding, so those services continue to be provided by the local authority and give reassurance around those services being in place. Could be that schools decide they'd rather have the funding themselves back into their budgets and go about their own procurement, or it could be that they decide they want to have the money back in their budgets and then come together and work with the local authority around how they like to have those services provided. So at the moment, what we're saying is that if schools would prefer to carry on with de-delegation, that would be absolutely fine. We'll have that back through the feedback, and then we'll know what level of service the local authority needs to provide going forwards. If the schools decide that they'd rather have money in their own budgets, there's no guarantee the local authority will be in a position to continue to provide those services they currently do, and we'd have to look at how that would be delivered. What we've got at the moment, we've got around 92 maintained primary and secondary schools at the point of writing. I'm just going to take you very quickly to Appendix 1 to the report, which just sets out the questions, and it is a really easy tick box one, which makes it nice and simple for schools to respond. I've picked up on some of the commentary that's come through with regards to Liz's last report around making sure that the consultation is as freely available as possible to make sure we get maximum response rates in there. But it literally simply is, would schools prefer to have the money back in their own budget, or would they prefer to have the guarantee knowing that the service will be provided by the local authority and they de-delegate that funding back? And that's literally the paper, like we said, Lisa, like we've seen before for the last goodness knows how many years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Grant. Do any maintained colleagues have any questions or comments for Grant on this one? Ed?
Sorry, Grant, it's me. Am I right in saying that last year there were different levels of de-delegation, like 0.75, 0.2? Am I getting confused? Am I getting that confused with something else?
No, you are sort of right, Ed, so don't worry about being confused. No, last year when we issued the consultation that Liz was talking about the transfer of funds from the schools block to the Hayes block, we set out several options there of amounts that could be transferred up to the 1%. In fact, we're above 1%, so schools could look at those. When it comes to the de-delegation, it's a straight either de-delegate or delegate the funding, and we don't talk about the individual amounts yet. We bring those to the Future Schools Forum meeting in January to go through the actual.
I got confused with the lamb. I thought that, and then yeah.
No problems at all. We did look a little bit for the school improvement service at different levels of amounts to be de-delegated, but consistently Schools Forum have been presented with the consultation response, which has been in favour of supporting the school improvement service at 100%. Although that has varied last time between primary and secondary, and that's again can come through on the consultation responses there. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Grant on that paper? I can't see any hands. I can't see any mics going off. There's nothing in the chat. So I propose that Schools Forum agree on the consultation questions for maintained schools around de-delegation and delegation of budgets for central services within the schools block. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Ed, very much indeed. I'll take the assent of the meeting to agree unless I hear otherwise. That's lovely. Then I move on to, thank you, Grant, very much for that. I move on to item 14 of the agenda this afternoon. That's confirmation of dates of future meetings. The date of our next meeting is due to be the 9th of October 2025. Seems a whole year away yet, at 1:30 in the afternoon, and will be held again via Microsoft Teams. In terms of item 15 this afternoon, I do not have, that's urgent items, I do not have any urgent items which I feel need to be considered as part of the meeting this afternoon. Helen, you've got your hand up.
The 9th of October is the first day of the WASH conference, I'm afraid to say.
So it is well spotted, Helen. We might have to have a look around that because Schools Forum might not have a chair amongst other things.
Or heads, we're second.
Or heads. Okay, we might have, well spotted, Helen. We might need to have a look at that one, Lisa. Okay, no urgent items then that I feel need to be considered this afternoon. So that is then the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank everyone very much for attending this afternoon and contributing to our meeting. Please take care, enjoy the last few weeks of term, have a lovely summer break when we get there. That feels a long way off yet. And I look forward to seeing everybody refreshed and ready for another year in October. Or a big thank you to those that are leaving us today and won't be joining us again in the future. The clerk will now end the recording of our meeting this afternoon and indicate when this has been completed. Please mute your microphone and remain silent until that confirmation has been received.
I'm just looking at the picture and it's like Ellen's just having a conversation